Welcome back to the Food Forest. Being December, we're going to start getting into some of the activism videos that I tend to do during the off season. Not today though. Today we're actually going to do a seed starting video specifically on the types of media that you can grow your seeds in. We're also going to do a little bit of a science tutorial on what plants need when they're just seeds and they're just about to sprout. What kind of things are they looking for? What are your things that are going to kill your plants and that kind of thing. So for those of you who don't really like the environmental activism stuff, it's the off season. This is what the food forest looks like right now. So there's not a whole lot of gardening that I can do besides, indoor stuff. For those of you who do like it though, and I know there's a lot of you that do like it, then, I'm excited for this stuff. There's a lot going on in the world right now that I'd like to talk about. But I want to see how it plays out a little more, specifically with like COP28 and the absolute circus that is. We'll get into that later though. Today I was just rotating out my microgreens. We did kale originally. We're done that kale. It was delicious. Those TerraFiber mats worked really, really well. And now we're going to do peas. Now the reason why we're going to do this one on growing media and plant needs is because I think it all lends together really well. And the reason why is, because I'm doing the peas, I thought, I'm not going to do them in the hemp mats. Now, pea seeds are fairly large, and I think that they will do better not necessarily on a, woven mat, but on, some kind of lifeless soil. We really do want lifeless soil for starting microgreens specifically, because we don't really care about the living soil food web. We just really are going to try to minimize molds and diseases and other kind of seeds that might germinate. When you're starting actual seeds, I actually do like using a mix of garden compost and native soil when I'm actually starting my seeds for the garden, because I want those plants to grow to adulthood and healthy. For the microgreens, as soon as they're up and they've got their first set of true leaves, we're harvesting them and we're going to eat them. So let's take a brief aside and talk about the science of what plants need when they first start. For a lot of the seasoned gardeners out there, this is going to be something that you already know, but I wish that there was more information out there on this. When I got started, I had to just fumble around and learn it all myself, and I've kind of learned it over the last decade or so. And I wish there was a concise video that explained it a little better, so I'm going to do that now for people. I know a lot of people are starting their permaculture journeys. A lot of permaculture journeys start with starting seeds indoors, and you don't really know what you're doing until you've done it. In the past, our ancestors used to teach that to us, but nowadays our parents were so disassociated with growing food themselves that they didn't have this information to hand down. So I'm going to try to do that now for you who are just starting out on your own journeys. Okay, so this right here is actually what a lot of seeds, like these peas, would actually start growing in nature. They would fall into grass or, fall in organic material, and they would grow up in the spring in this condition. So this is what plants have evolved to actually grow in. So most seeds won't actually fall down into dirt. They'll actually fall down into grasses, and then eventually, they'll be trampled down when things pass by, when rains fall down on the ground and drag them down further closer to the soil, and then they'll germinate. When they're a little higher up, they're going to be a little colder and cooler. When they're a little closer to the earth, they'll get a little bit of the earth heating to actually warm them up a little bit. Now, seeds that just fall on top of something like this and then germinate wouldn't do really well because their roots might not even ever hit the soil. So most seeds don't actually have sunlight as a condition to trigger germination, and that is by genetic design. That is by evolution, because the seeds that would have sprouted on top of something like this wouldn't have survived. It's only the ones that would have fallen down to get to the soil level, those ones would have germinated. So often you have a humidity and a temperature germination requirement, not a sun germination requirement. So up where it's going to be really sunny on top of this and probably a little drier, those seeds won't germinate. They'll wait till they fall down to the soil level to actually trigger germination. Now, I hope this stuff isn't too boring, but I really like to teach by getting people to understand the topic and not just, hear me say it and then do it. Because when we actually understand the science behind how things work, it gives us the opportunity to adapt and improvise from a place of knowledge and understanding. Now, one of the other things that happens when a seed falls down into thatch is that the seed and the roots actually have access to quite a bit of oxygen. Oxygen is going to be super important for two things for your seed. First off, the roots of plants actually don't perform photosynthesis, the leaves do. The roots of the plants actually perform respiration, just like I do. So again, what that means for your starting plants, because they're mostly roots at the beginning, is that you don't need sunlight to drive photosynthesis. You actually just need oxygen to drive respiration. The other thing that the plants will want is humidity conditions. Again, plants that fall on the top are going to be drier, so they're not going to germinate right away. So you do want to have a little bit of humidity, and you want the plant roots, when they come out, to have access to the water that they need right away. The seeds themselves will actually have all the nutrients that they need in the seed, and those nutrients in the seed will last the plant roughly until it gets its first set of true leaves. And that makes sense because it doesn't have access to photosynthesis until it has those first set of true leaves. The first set of true leaves are always going to try to maximize photosynthesis. They're going to have a big panel. And so even if you have something like a carrot, carrots have evolved the ability to push up a tall stalk. So when they have these thin little leaves, they can get up over things and they can survive. But when they're small and short, they want to have a nice broad solar panel so that any filtered light that falls between the thatch that they germinated on, the plant can actually get access to that photosynthesis until it gets its main leaves and gets some growth pushed up. Now I'm standing in my swale for the last point about water. When the snows melt, I actually create these swales. A lot of permaculturists do. It's not like it's a me thing. But we create these swales in order to store and hold water so that when it seeps down under the ground, it can wick up from the bottom inside the soil level of the berm that the trees are planted in. That way, the tree has access to the water that it needs, but at the same time, the soil will drain and the tree isn't going to be starved of oxygen. So although when rain falls, it's falling through an atmosphere, the atmosphere is, nitrogen, oxygen, carbon dioxide, and all these gases, the raindrops will actually pick up some of those gases. When they hit the ground, they'll actually bring some of those gases down into the soil. So they'll actually bring nitrogen and oxygen down into the soil. But when we're starting our plants indoors in seeds and we're just pulling water out of a tap, that water, it doesn't have the oxygen level that a raindrop would have falling down through the atmosphere of the sky. One of the most common things that new gardeners do when they're starting their seeds is they actually overwater. New gardeners always think plants need water, and they'll overwater, but what actually happens when you overwater, especially with tap water, is that the oxygen can't get down to the roots, and it's literally like me drowning in a pool of water because, again, the roots perform respiration, not photosynthesis, so they do need access to oxygen. So one thing that our growing medium is going to want to do is suck and hold water, but hold it in a way that's not going to actually starve oxygen out of the plants. For that, we actually want soil media that acts like a sponge. If you think of yourself as a little microbiological organism walking around on the surface inside of a sponge, the sponge could be soaking wet, but you can still breathe because you're walking on top of the thing that's holding the moisture. That's what we essentially want in our soil medium. We want there to be grain boundaries in between the soil particulates where water can get into, but it can also drain out of those inner spaces. And then when the water drains out, it'll suck gases in from the atmosphere, and then the plants have access to the gases and oxygen that they need in order to perform respiration. Okay, summary. We'll do seeds first and then the soil second. So for seeds don't need light. Some do, but like 1% of seeds maybe, if that, do. Most seeds don't need any light to trigger germination at all. You could actually germinate them in a closet. They do need temperature because the seeds that would have germinated in the middle of the wintertime would have died. They wouldn't have passed their genetics on. They do need temperature. And typically how that works is there's an ideal temperature range for each seed. You can look those up. In general, you want to be around, a warm summer day temperature. Too hot and you'll damage the seed. Too cold and the germination might happen. It'll probably happen. It'll just happen over a long time. On germination quickly, there is a thing called cold stratification for seeds that have evolved in like my climate, where some seeds will actually go dormant and then start kind of like a ticker timer until they see a certain number of days below a certain temperature, and then they'll germinate once it warms up after that. That's actually a really ingenious evolutionary thing that some seeds have done, because that way if it gets really warm in December, then the seed might not germinate because it hasn't seen enough cold days, so it actually doesn't trust that the spring is here. It's super brilliant. So if you're harvesting seeds in the wild to start, you might need to cold stratify them. Check it on the internet and see your seed and if it does have a cold stratification requirement. But seeds need humidity and they need temperature. Okay, summary for the soil. What the soil needs. The soil does not need nutrients to start the seed. So once your plants have a first set of true leaves, that's when they actually are going to need some kind of fertility adding, whether that is just from compost and the soil actually having fertility in it. If you're going to grow an adult plant, for microgreens you're just going to harvest them, so you don't really care about that. So it's at this point where if you are starting adult plants and you're starting them in something like peat moss, by the way, don't do that. Peat moss is bad. If you're starting them in something like peat moss that is nutrient poor, has no nutrients at all, then at this point you're going to have to do something to add nutrients in and feed your plants. The soil's job is mostly just to hold the roots of the plant. That's really what its job is. The second job that it would have would be to hold moisture, but in a way that doesn't suffocate the plants. So you could start plants in gravel. The gravel would actually hold the plant roots. It's something for them to grip onto, but it's not going to suck in any moisture, and any water that you do add is going to suffocate the plants. So you actually want something that's going to suck in moisture. That's why a lot of people use things like coconut coir, shredded bark, shredded newspaper, stuff that acts like a sponge but won't actually suffocate the plant. So the soil needs to hold plant roots and hold water in a way that's like a sponge. And if you're growing adult plants, it needs to have some kind of nutrient in it, or you're going to have to add it. So that's basically it. Our growing strategy is now going to be based off of these things, and also preventing the things that would kill the seed. Lack of water can be one, but that's under your control. Mold and diseases are really the thing that's going to take out your plants when you're starting and you really don't know what you're doing, and I have tips for that as well. Okay, so here is the next set of peas that I did, and we're actually growing it oddly enough in peat moss and perlite, and that is because when I first started gardening 10 years ago, I actually bought a bag of peat moss that I still have, and it's perfect for this, so I'm going to use it for this. I wouldn't use this ever again. Please see my previous guide on seed starting when I talk about these TerraFiber mats on why. But again, these TerraFiber mats, I don't think that they're going to be great at growing big seeds like peas, for example. So you put the pea seed on top of the TerraFiber mat, and then what? It does want to be, in some kind of medium, ideally. So we're going to use the rest of this peat moss, and then we'll add that into the gardens just as a soil amendment. Peat moss is great for absorbing water. It's why people use it. It acts like a sponge, but at the same time it allows oxygen to get in there. The perlite is for draining, basically the same idea. It allows water to get drained out of the medium. So a little bit of a mix of that is great. The perlite acts as increased drainage, and the peat moss acts as water holding and retention. So you can build your own soil medium and just understand the things that we talked about in the beginning of the video. But for growing microgreens, here's the kale microgreens. For growing microgreens, it's perfect to actually have a dead soil, not a living soil. And it's a great way. I've actually got my lunch here. It's some leftovers, noodles, and it's a great way to just add some nutrition in to whatever you're eating. So that's my lunch for today. I don't know about you other dads out there, especially. I think we tend to fall into this role, is that I'm the garbage disposal in my house. So I eat all the leftovers that no one else wants to eat, or that are, maybe a little bit older. So I eat those. That's one thing that's really nice about these microgreens, is I can add some nutrition into, whatever scraps I can, scrounge together for lunches or dinners, to make sure that no food goes to waste. So like I said, we're going to try peas out now. Peas are a little bit sweeter, so I think the family's going to like this more. The kale is a really mild taste. Arugula is a little bit of a spicier. If anyone eats nasturtium or anything like that, it's got a kind of similar little spice to it. And then especially in the microgreens, I find that it's fairly spicy, so it's nice to mix in with other things. But we're gonna try to get the kids and everyone else enjoying these pea sprouts. So I'm not going to tell you exactly what growing medium to grow in, but use the stuff that we discussed at the beginning to actually go through and make the decision yourself. When possible, always source locally and sustainably. That's the best thing to do. So you can use whatever you want. If you live in an area where you can get access to coconut coir and it's local, then that's fantastic. Use that. You can use, seaweed, kelp, so many different things you can use. Shredded bark, wonderful stuff. We're actually going to run this on the seed starting mat just to increase the speed at which it germinates. You don't have to do that. That will just make the seeds germinate quicker, but they will still germinate as long as you're above, I don't know, 50 degrees Fahrenheit, something like that. They should still germinate. This will just help them germinate a little faster. Now, to prevent mold issues, what you need to do is I cover this up to keep humidity in, and that will help the seeds germinate. Once they're up, though, I actually do, a cycle where I'll pull this off and I'll let the soil dry out a little bit before I water again. I'll try to water from below, basically by adding water in between these two trays. This one has holes in it here, and then the bottom one doesn't. And what I try to do is get the top layer of the soil to dry out once in a while, maybe every 3 days, to completely dry out. And that will help break any mold or fungal issues in the soil. That is going to be something that will kill your plants if you don't do that. So if you just keep this covered all the time, then you're going to create an environment for mold and fungal issues for your plants, which will take them out. And that's something that you want to try to break. So again, just pop the lid off once in a while and let those things dry out. The plants will survive it. They'll get a little droopy, but then you can just water them up. They'll perk right back up and the mold cycle will be broken. So we'll cover this up. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you on the next one.